Tren de Aragua. That's right, TDA, the Venezuelan gang that is getting deported to El Salvador. We need to talk about them in the context of presidential power. Remember, all of constitutional law is a big spider web. It all connects as one big tapestry. I like to mix metaphors as well. Make sure we understand all of this. We want to make sure you understand presidential power, judicial power, congressional power, how this all works together, and why, in the end of the day, indeed, President Trump, as the executive under Article 2 of the Constitution, gets to deport these illegal aliens who have been declared really enemies of the American Republic. Let's break down the constitutional geekiness of the deportations of this criminal gang when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4 Box of Dine, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America at the 2025 Gundies Awards. Thank you so much for your support. All right, folks, so we're going to get a little geeky today about presidential power in the Constitution, or in the context of our American constitutional system. As you know, the most basic things are you have 3 branches of government created by the United States Constitution. The first branch, of course, is Congress under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. The second branch of government is the President under the executive branch of government. That's Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. And last but not least, of course, we have Article 3, which creates the U.S. Supreme Court and any inferior courts that Congress thereby creates. Now, the reason why I want to remind you of this is there's a big debate, constitutional debate, involving whether or not Donald Trump and the executive branch can deport the gang members of this Tren de Aragua, how's that, folks, of TDA, who are allegedly illegal alien gang members from Venezuela, and they are being captured by ICE here in the United States, working for the Department of Homeland Security and President Trump, all within the executive branch, and being shipped down to that very scary prison in El Salvador. Now, again, I want to remind you of something that is very important that seems to keep getting lost by the typical anti-Trump, anti-American media, and that is, unlike the Congress, which is Article 1 of the Constitution, unlike the judiciary, which is Article 3, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution is very special because it vests or gives or grants all of the executive power in the United States, all of it, to a single person, to a president of the United States of America. The language of Article 2, Section 1, specifically provides, quote, that the executive power shall be vested in a, not many, but a president of the United States of America. This is often referred to as the vesting clause, and it basically metaphorically explains or articulates the notion that the President of the United States, in today's world, President Donald Trump, holds all the executive authority under the U.S. Constitution, under Article 2. This includes the power to enforce federal laws. This includes the power to defend the borders, to engage in foreign affairs, foreign policy, command the military, appoint executive officers, including the cabinet officials. And, of course, he is the commander-in-chief, which means he is the leading #1 head honcho of America's military forces. Now, the way to generally understand this, and we don't need to get into big constitutional debates about the meaning of the executive power, but the way to really understand this is that Donald Trump is the CEO and the head honcho of the executive branch as the president. Everyone that works within the executive branch works for President Trump. That includes the cabinet officials, the people that work for the cabinet officials, and all the people that work within the executive branch. Now, the people that work over on Capitol Hill for the U.S. Congress don't work for President Trump. They work for the legislative branch. The people that are the law clerks and the law secretaries and work for the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal courts around this country, they are employees of the judicial branch, Article 3. Now, the reason why I want to emphasize this distinction between the 3 branches is because this plays a huge role in understanding, big picture-wise, the authority of President Trump to kick out of this country the gang members of Tren de Aragua, or TDA. whether they overstay their visa, whether they're here illegally, it doesn't matter. He can kick them out and deport them if he concludes that they are here illegally and or they're basically someone that is advancing an interest other than the American interest under a 200-year-old statute from the Alien and Sedition Act years early in the country called the Alien Enemies Act. Now, the reason why I want to talk about the Alien Enemies Act in the context of the separation of powers is under this long-standing federal statute that's been around almost as long as the Constitution itself. It's not quite as old as the United States Constitution, but it's pretty close. It was enacted in 1798. The Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights was enacted in 1791. The original Constitution was a few years before that. Okay? Now, the reason why you need to understand this Alien Enemies Act is it gives the president the power, the authority under statutory law to kick people out of the country and keep them out in times of war, as well as if there's an invasion. Now, here's why I want you to understand this separation of powers and why this matters. There's always a question, or there's often a question about who gets to decide. And this is a very big question in American law. Who gets to decide? Like, we can all agree that if somebody's a terrorist, they should be kicked out of the country, okay? But a big constitutional question could be, who decides whether or not he's a terrorist? Does Mark Smith get to decide? Do you get to decide if this person's a terrorist? Do the courts get to decide? Does the President of the United States get to decide? Does Congress get to decide? So who gets to decide these constitutional questions or these other issues is a big deal. And that is what's going on in these fights about Donald Trump trying to clear the country out of all these illegal aliens and gang members and cartel members and people that should not be here, but were let in to the tune of tens of millions of people thanks to Joe Biden's open border policy. And Donald Trump's trying to kick them out. So the fight constitutionally is, and this is why I want to break it down, is right now Donald Trump's position is he is the executive branch with the full executive power to enforce the laws. And if he decides that someone is a gang member here illegally, he has the authority by himself as the head of the executive branch to kick their butt out. And he relies upon, among other things, his Article 2 authority under the Constitution, as well as the language in the Alien Enemies Act that says, again, if he decides there is an invasion occurring, that gives him the authority to kick people out. Now, what's happening here is that the anti-Trumpers, the people that want the Trump agenda to fail, are taking the position that Donald Trump, as the President of the United States in the executive branch, does not have the sole and exclusive authority to decide if someone is a terrorist or a gang member and or whether or not they should be deported. That part of this authority relies upon or is deferred to or includes or has, if you will, the courts. So basically the anti-Trumpers are saying that the courts have authority to weigh in to make sure that the president is doing his job. And the president, Donald Trump, is saying, you're insane. You are our court. I am the president. I have the authority, express authority under the Alien Enemies Act to make these determinations because I am the one person in the country that all Americans had a chance to vote for. The courts, no one gets to vote for federal judges. They are appointed by the President of the United States. Well, they're nominated by the President of the United States, and they're confirmed by the U.S. Senate. That's a process that does not directly involve we the people, although, of course, we elect the representatives who then do the process. But we the people don't have a direct say in who are the judges. We don't get to nominate them. We don't get to confirm them. Likewise, when you're dealing with senators or congressmen, right, with House members, the reality is they are elected either by a state if they're a U.S. senator, or they're elected in their congressional district if they're a member of the House of Representatives. So again, the only person in the entire federal system that we all Americans get to vote for is the President of the United States, who has the full vested authority of Article 2 to make these decisions. So to say that democracy is being threatened by Donald Trump exercising his authority to fulfill his campaign promises to kick these people out using the statute, the Alien Enemies Act, is hooey because he's the one person that everyone had a chance to vote for. I didn't have a say to vote on, congressmen and senators and all over the country, right? I mean, I'm only in one state, not 50. Same with you. You only get to vote for the people in your state, not all 50 states. You only get the chance to speak to national policy when it comes to the president. Okay, so with that said, let's move on. There's another thing you need to understand about the courts. Courts have historically, under a doctrine known as the political question doctrine, have sometimes said, even if there's a legitimate constitutional question about something, there's a legitimate constitutional debate, there are some instances where the courts say, you know what, we agree there's a constitutional issue here, but we, the courts, are not institutionally capable of making this decision. And therefore, under the political question doctrine, sometimes something referred to often, or sometimes also referred to as the non-justiciability doctrine, the notion is that the courts lack the institutional capability to make certain decisions, and that those constitutional debates should be resolved not by the courts, not in the courts, but by the president or by the Congress. Now, a big example of this is in 1973, when President Richard Nixon was engaging in the bombing of Cambodia, which was kind of the secret bombing of Cambodia as part of the Vietnam War. Now, there were lawsuits filed claiming that Richard Nixon, as president, lacked the legal authority to bomb Cambodia because there was not a congressional declaration of war, and therefore Richard Nixon, the president, did not have the authority to engage in war in Cambodia by dropping these bombs. There were lawsuits filed, and at one point, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in New York City had actually enjoined, meaning entered a court order that says Richard Nixon had to stop the bombing of Cambodia, but the Supreme Court came back and basically said, we're going to lift the stay. We are the Supreme Court of the United States. The reality is, it's a legitimate constitutional question whether or not Richard Nixon has the legal authority under the Constitution to be bombing Cambodia in a secret way without Congress blessing it. But we don't think we, the courts, have the institutional capability or the competency to make these determinations, because this involves all sorts of foreign policy considerations, national security issues, border policy, nuclear weapon issues. So basically they're saying, look, we agree there's a constitutional issue here, but we're not going to be the ones that resolve it. We're going to let the constitutional question get resolved by the president, by the Congress, and by we the people. We the courts are going to back off. Now, when it comes to what's going on with President Trump and these deportations, the reality is, as far as I'm concerned, almost all of these questions should be resolved by President Trump and not by the courts, especially any that touches fingers with non-American citizens, because who makes the decision as to whether or not an illegal alien or whether or not somebody with a green card, in fact, should be deported because it's in the interest of national security, or there's a danger to national security or a threat to national security if they remain in the United States. And that includes, but is not limited to, these Arugia, TDA, gang members, having fun pronouncing those words, right? TDA, can't believe we only have to learn to pronounce these words right in America because we've imported these people. Thank you, Joe Biden. But anyway, the bottom line is, at the end of the day, these decisions about how to effectuate and protect our country against these foreign invaders, and whether or not there's an invasion in the first place, as defined by the Alien Enemies Act, is ultimately should be determined by the President of the United States, who has the singular responsibility to protect all of us as the commander-in-chief, and is the one person that we all voted for. And the fact that these courts are getting involved to override essentially national security, foreign policy, border issues, immigration issues, all of which traditionally falls within the vested authority of the President of the United States, is really hooey and unacceptable. Even if you could argue there's a constitutional question posed as to whether or not Donald Trump has the full-blown constitutional authority to do some of these things to protect the national interest against foreigners. Remember, all this is dealing with foreigners. None of these people are American citizens. He is kicking out of the country either illegal aliens, he's kicking out of the country foreign invaders, or he's kicking out of the country people with green cards who are here with the privilege to be here. They have the privilege to be here as green card holders, but not the right, because there's many ways you can remove somebody's green card from them if they violate certain rules and whatnot. The bottom line is who gets to decide. This should always be the President of the United States. We're not talking about kicking United States citizens out here, which would require something different, but we're talking about non-Americans, we're talking about foreigners, illegal aliens, and the like. And in that context, as a general matter, it seems to me that the only person should be making these determinations as to whether or not there's a problem, whether or not there's an invasion, whether or not somebody poses a risk to the American public and to national security, whether or not they're advancing propaganda to undercut our country and our culture. All of this should be determined within the executive branch under the ultimate control of President Donald J. Trump as the President of the United States. And to the extent there is a constitutional question, again, I don't think the courts are institutionally capable of making these determinations because there's too many moving parts that need to be considered, as we're seeing with some of these litigations out there. And hopefully the U.S. Supreme Court and the Roberts Court steps up and does the right things and shuts these lower court cases down. I think that's ultimately where we're going to get to, but it's sucking up a lot of time of President Trump and his agenda that should be better focused on other things than spending all their time in court fighting these anti-Trumpers in these terrible courts, the same courts that basically would have approved Donald Trump being kicked off the ballot in 2024 as an insurrectionist and allowing Jack Smith to destroy his campaign and not allow we the people to vote for Donald Trump in 2024. But again, the history of the future is yet to be written. So although I think we've got the better argument here, Donald Trump has the better argument here, one can only guess what the Roberts Court is ultimately going to do, although I'm cautiously optimistic it's all going to work out for the best for America, for President Trump, his agenda, and yes, indeed, for the Second Amendment. All right, folks, so hope you enjoyed today's conversation about the Constitution. Remember, it all ties in to the Constitution, ties into all the issues, including the Second Amendment. If we can't protect America's borders, if we can't protect American citizens from foreigners and foreign invasion, then the right to keep and bear arms will fall by the wayside, along with our other liberties and the rest of our culture. So there you have it. Make sure you follow me at X at 4boxofdiner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and Rumble, and I look forward to talking to all of you very soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.